Government-sponsored health care would lead to rationing. It would ruin the quality of health care in America.
Senator Kerry, we got several questions along this line, and I'm just curious if you'd go further on what you talked about with tort reform. Would you be favoring capping awards on pain and suffering? Would you limit attorneys' fees? Yes. To follow up on this for a minute.
Yeah, I think we should look at the punitive, and we should have some limitations. But look, what's really important, John, is the president's just trying to scare everybody here with throwing labels around. I mean, compassionate conservative, what does that mean? Cutting 500,000 kids from after-school programs? Cutting 365,000 kids from health care? Running up the biggest deficits in American history? Mr. President, you're batting 0 for 2. I mean, seriously. Labels don't mean anything. What means something is, do you have a plan? And I want to talk about my plan some more. I hope we can.
We'll get to that in just a minute.
You're right. What does matter is the plan. He said he is for, you're now for capping punitive damages. That's odd. You should have shown up on the floor in the Senate and voted for it then. Medical liability issues are a problem, a significant problem. He's been in the United States Senate for 20 years, and he hadn't addressed it. We passed it out of the House of Representatives. Guess where it's stuck? It's stuck in the Senate because the trial lawyers won't act on it, and he's put a trial lawyer on the ticket.
The next question is for President Bush, and it comes from Matthew O'Brien.
Mr. President, you have enjoyed a Republican majority in the House and Senate for most of your presidency. In that time, you've not vetoed a single spending bill. Excluding $120 billion spent in Iraq and Afghanistan, there has been $700 billion spent and not paid for by taxes. Please explain how the spending you have approved and not paid for is better for the American people than the spending proposed by your opponent.
Right. Thank you for that. We have a deficit. We have a deficit because this country went into a recession. You might remember the stock market started to decline dramatically 6 months before I came to office, and then the bubble of the 1990s popped. And that cost us revenue. That cost us revenue. Secondly, we're at war. And I'm going to spend what it takes to win the war. More than just $120 billion for Iraq and Afghanistan. We got to pay our troops more. We have. We've increased money for ammunition and weapons and pay and homeland security. I just told this lady over here we went from $10 billion to $30 billion to protect the homeland. I think we have an obligation to spend that kind of money. And plus, we cut taxes for everybody. Everybody got tax relief so that they get out of the recession. I think if you raise taxes during a recession, you head to depression. I come from the school of thought that says when people have more money in their pocket during tough economic times, it increases demand or investment. Small businesses begin to grow, and jobs are added. We found out today that over the past 13 months, we've added 1.9 million new jobs in the last 13 months. I proposed a plan, detailed budget, that shows us cutting the deficit in half by 5 years. And you're right, I haven't vetoed any spending bills because we worked together. Non-homeland, non-defense discretionary spending was rising at 15% a year when I got into office. And today it's less than 1% because we're working together to try to bring this deficit under control. Like you, I'm concerned about the deficit. But I am not going to shortchange our troops in harm's way. And I'm not going to run up taxes which will cost this economy jobs. Thank you for your question.
Senator Kerry, minute and a half.
Let me begin by saying that my health care plan is not what the President described. It is not a government takeover. You have choice. Choose your doctor. Choose your plan. The government has nothing to do with it. In fact, it doesn't ask you to do anything. If you don't want to take it, you don't have to. If you like your high premiums, you keep them. That's the way we leave it. Now, with respect to the deficit, the President was handed a $5.6 trillion surplus, ladies and gentlemen. That's where he was when he came into office. We now have a $2.6 trillion deficit. This is the biggest turnaround in the history of the country. He's the first president in 72 years to lose jobs. He talked about war. This is the first time the United States of America has ever had a tax cut when we're at war. Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, others knew how to lead. They knew how to ask the American people for the right things. 1% of America The highest 1% of income earners in America got $89 billion of tax cut last year. 1% of America got more than the 80% of America that earned from $100,000 down. The president thinks it's more important to fight for that top 1% than to fight for fiscal responsibility and to fight for you. I want to put money in your pocket. I have a proposal for a tax cut for all people earning less than the $200,000. The only people affected by my plan are the top income earners of America.
I heard you both say, I have heard you both say during the campaign, I just heard you say it, that you're going to cut the deficit by a half in 4 years. But I didn't hear one thing in the last 3.5 minutes that would indicate how either one of you do that.
Well, look at the budget. One is make sure Congress doesn't overspend. But let me talk back about where we've been. The stock market was declining 6 months prior to my arrival. It was the largest stock market correction, one of the largest in history, which foretold a recession. Because we cut taxes on everybody. Remember, we ran up the child credit by 1,000, we reduced the marriage penalty, we created the 10% bracket. Everybody who pays taxes got relief. The recession was one of the shortest in our nation's history.
Senator Kerry, 30 seconds.
After 9/11, after the recession had ended, the president asked for another tax cut and promised 5.6 million jobs would be created. He lost 1.6 million, ladies and gentlemen. And most of that tax cut went to the wealthiest people in the country. He came and asked for a tax cut. We wanted a tax cut to kick the economy into gear. You know what he presented us with? A $25 billion giveaway to the biggest corporations in America, including a $254 million refund check to Enron. Wrong priorities. You're my priority.
Senator Kerry, the next question will be for you, and it comes from James Varner, who I believe is in this section. Mr. Varner, need a microphone.
Thank you. Senator Kerry, would you be willing to look directly into the camera and, using simple and unequivocal language, give the American people your solemn pledge not to sign any legislation that will increase the tax burden on families earning less than $200,000 a year during your first term?
Absolutely. Yes. Right into the camera. Yes. I am not going to raise taxes. I have a tax cut, and here's my tax cut. I raised the child care credit by $1,000 for families to help them be able to take care of their kids. I have a $4,000 tuition tax credit that goes to parents and kids, if they're earning for themselves, to be able to pay for college. And I lower the cost of health care in the way that I described to you. Every part of my program, I've shown how I'm going to pay for it. And I've gotten good people, like former Secretary of the Treasury Bob Rubin, for instance, who showed how to balance budgets and give you a good economy, to help me crunch these numbers and make them work. I've even scaled back some of my favorite programs already, like the child care program I wanted to fund, and the National Service Program, because the president's deficit keeps growing, and I've said, as a pledge, I'm going to cut the deficit in half in 4 years. Now, I'm going to restore what we did in the 1990s, ladies and gentlemen. Pay as you go. We're going to do it like you do it. The president broke the pay-as-you-go rule. Somebody here asked the question about why haven't you vetoed something? It's a good question. If you care about it, why don't you veto it? I think John McCain called the energy bill the no lobbyists left behind bill. I mean, you got to stand up and fight somewhere, folks. I'm pledging I will not raise taxes. I'm giving a tax cut to the people earning less than $200,000 a year. Now, for the people earning more than $200,000 a year, you're going to see a rollback to the level we were at with Bill Clinton, when people made a lot of money. And looking around here at this group here, I suspect there are only 3 people here who are going to be affected. The president, me, and Charlie, I'm sorry, you too.
Mr. President, 90 seconds.
It's just not credible. When he talks about being fiscally conservative, it's just not credible. If you look at his record in the Senate, he voted to break the spending, the spending caps, over 200 times. And here he says he's going to be a fiscal conservative all of a sudden. It's just not credible. You cannot believe it. And of course he's going to raise your taxes. You see, he's proposed $2.2 trillion of new spending. And so he said, well, how are you going to pay for it? He said, well, he's going to raise the taxes on the rich. That's what he said, the top two brackets. That raises, he says $800 billion, we say $600 billion. We got battling green eye shades. Somewhere in between those numbers. And so there's a difference. What he's promised and what he can raise. Now, either he's going to break all these wonderful promises he's told you about, or he's going to raise taxes. And I suspect, given his record, he's going to raise taxes. Is my time up yet?
No, you can keep going.
Keep going, good.
You're on a
He looked at me like my clock was up. I think that the way to grow this economy is to keep taxes low, is to have an energy plan, is to have litigation reform. As I told you, we just got a report that said over the past 13 months we created 1.9 million new jobs. We're growing. And so the fundamental question in this campaign is who's going to keep the economy growing so people can work? That's the fundamental question.
I'm going to come back.